Good afternoon, and welcome to today's presentation on the Prophesy Fuel Card Manager. My name is Kevin Pasternack, Vice President of Sales of the Transportation Division, and I will be the moderator for today's presentation. Presenting today will be Steve Knauber, one of our Senior Implementation Consultants. Steve has been with Prophesy HighJump since 1998. He's worked in support, as a pre-sales engineer, an implementation consultant, and today as a Senior Implementation Consultant. All attendees will be muted through today's presentation. If you have a question for Steve, please type it in the chat box that is located either on the top or the side of your screen. Please make sure you're sending the chat to me, Kevin Pasternack, and not the entire group. Steve will then answer the questions at the end of today's presentation. If you have not yet signed up for our upcoming user conference, Elevate 2016, I encourage you to do so today. All HighJump business units, including warehouse management, 3PL/logistics, direct store delivery, EDI, and of course transportation will be represented at the user conference. In 2015 at our user conference in Las Vegas, we had over 600 people attend. This is a great place for you not only network with other Prophesy users, but all kinds of people that do business with transportation companies. The conference includes 2.5 days of training on the Prophesy dispatch software. In addition, you'll learn more about all the HighJump products as well as what is coming in the future. All Prophesy Dispatch customers can still take advantage of the early bird discount by using promo code Prophesy16 when registering. To learn more about the conference and to register, please go to HighJump.com/Elevate 2016. We certainly look forward to seeing you all in Orlando in March. And now Steve is going to tell us about the Prophesy Fuel Card Manager. Steve?
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everybody. My name's Steve, and welcome to our Fuel Card Manager webinar today. Today we're going to go through some of the features of the Fuel Card Manager. The features of the Fuel Card Manager that make it so special would be its ability to help us manage multiple fuel cards for a single driver. So if you have drivers that carry different types of cards, the Fuel Card Manager will allow you to set each one of those cards up for that driver and be able to import fuel transactions. It allows us to bring in fuel transactions as well as cash advances and card usage fees as well. The Fuel Card Manager allows you as a company owner or software user to be able to set up an automated chargeable fee back to the driver for the use of your fuel card based on either the presence of a cash advance or fuel advance. And it also allows us to set up granular expense detail for certain cards that follow the Comdata file type, such as Comdata, EFF, and TCH, using a feature they call product codes. And what that means is that when there is a code that exists, we can map it to identify it as a specific type of expense, and that expense can then be customized, mapped into your accounting application, such as QuickBooks, separated from the other types of expenses. So all of these would be unique things to the Fuel Card Manager. So what we're going to cover today, again, we are going to go into the Fuel Card Manager, and we're actually going to set up a fuel card. We'll set up for 2 different drivers, a driver template for an owner-operator, a driver template for a payroll driver. We're going to link them to some cards. We're going to create profiles, discuss the expense codes, show you how to custom map those. And then I'm actually going to import some fuel transactions for those drivers into the dispatch system. After those transactions have been imported, I will even browse you around the program to look at them through a couple of different focus areas, like a report, through an advanced screen, and then also through the settlement window. And so that's what we are going to cover today. So now we're going to move into the live demonstration portion of this, and we're going to be sharing out my screen in just a moment here. So hopefully everyone can now see my dispatch application. So the Fuel Card Manager, the setup and usage of it takes place under the utility menu. It would include a new menu option called Fuel Card Import if you have this feature as part of your software. So there are 3 sections to the fuel card import or fuel card manager. There is the actual import section, which we will do later. There's the fuel card manager, where all the setup is actually done with the drivers and the fuel cards and expense codes. And then finally, there's what's called a cross-reference table. This is for unit numbers, which would help us map truck numbers from your fuel card file to corresponding truck numbers in the dispatch system, your actual tractor list, where they might not be the same. Examples of this would be fuel card files that pass unit numbers where you have them set up with a leading 0 in your tractor list, and the fuel card file sends them without the leading 0. This cross-reference table allows you to tell the interface that they are, in fact, the same unit. But we're going to be focusing on the fuel card manager. So I'm going to click on that. And the fuel card manager is broken into 4 sections: templates, resource card, fuel card setup, advanced amount types, and fuel card vendors. So I'm going to start off under the fuel card vendor section. So the fuel card vendor section is a way for you to represent the different fuel card vendors, which would be essentially the fuel cards that you have. So the more fuel cards that your drivers or that you might subscribe to or your drivers carry, the more fuel card vendors that you would have in this list. So examples would be Comdata, TCH, EFS, Fleet One, Right Express, and any others that I may have forgotten, but those are obviously a handful of examples. So I'm going to go into the Comdata. I'm going to modify an existing one, but if you wanted to add a new fuel card vendor, you would need to just obviously click the Add button here. But I'm going to double-click to allow me to zoom into this vendor profile. So again, the purpose of this is to create a vendor profile that gets associated to the fuel card number that gets linked to a driver that would be using that fuel card. When setting this up, it just requires a simple ID and some location, name, address information. What is unique about the Comdata vendor, or those that deal in the Comdata format, is once again the use of what we refer to, or they refer to, as product codes. So even though this says Comdata only, it is anyone that follows the Comdata format. So under the product code buttons, it lists the different codes. So each code represents, it has a corresponding description. So on the left-hand side of this screen, the product code and description is the Comdata product code number. So when they pass a 0, it's an additive. When they pass a 1, it's a tire repair. A 2, repair. 3, lubricant. 4, tire purchase. 5, expense, right on down the list. I'm not going to do all of them, but if you just run your eyes down very quickly, you can see all the way through 9, and then they start using the alphabet to go from there, A, B, C, D, E, all the way through M. On the right-hand side, and this is where one of the kind of more powerful features of this module comes into play, would be the expense type or code that we can then associate that product code with, so that I can define lubricant as an expense type oil. That creates a unique code, and with each expense type label, it allows me the ability to, with a customized mapping interface of our accounts, and I'm going to use QuickBooks as my example, this would allow me to now specifically map this oil expense type directly into QuickBooks to its own expense account. And it allows me just to discern. So under truck repairs, this has a specific expense code of repairs. That means that this repair code can then be uniquely mapped to a corresponding expense account in my QuickBooks interface. Okay, I'm going to click the drop down here, and you'll see that there is a list of these expense types. Okay, so it does come with a default list of codes. I'm just going to exit from this screen and close the vendor window for just a moment, and we're going to return here. But under advanced amount types, this is that expense code list. So I could actually create additional codes. So for example, if I wanted to create a new one, I'm going to code this. I just added a new expense code. So if I wanted to return back to my fuel vendor and update and go into my product code list, let's say, for example, under trailer expense, instead of calling that other, I should now be able to use the miscellaneous code, which would create a new mapping capability separating this trailer expense from the other category into a miscellaneous category. Now, if my eyes were a little bit better, I could have used the one that actually said miscellaneous, but I think you get the idea of how this is working. I could have made miscellaneous go to miscellaneous and trailer expense go to other, or create a new code called trailer and trailer expense and make it go there. So the ability to customize your expense codes to specific product codes, and this is uniquely for the Comdata file format. Okay, so we're going to discuss other formats. What do you do in other carded formats in just a moment. So I'm going to exit out of here, and I'm going to close the vendor setup window. And now we're going to go into templates. So templates is what manages the behavior of when we import the actual transactions, the fuel, the cash, the fees, the discounts, and those other amounts. I'll call them other amounts now just for the visual connection to make in this template. But examples of the product codes like oils and tire repairs and other types of things that you might get on your card. So all of those things are part of the transaction detail file that you are getting from your fuel card vendor that we will be importing into the system. So what this template does is it actually controls your ability either by a group of drivers or by individual driver. So what I mean by that is I could create a template that says company that I could apply to all of my company drivers. I could create one called owners. This is for my owner ops or 1099s that behave differently than my company drivers. Each one allows me to define a different behavior. So for any exception, I would have to create a new template. So if I have an individual that behaves differently or outside my default behaviors, I could create them a custom template. Okay? So in this example, we have two choices with so the advanced import type, these are the types of things that are actually being mapped into the system through the fuel file. And we want to know whether that item is going to be a company expense, meaning it is not charged to the driver and instead is absorbed as an expense by you, the company, or whether it's a driver expense, meaning it's something that is charged to the driver. So in a company template, meaning what template I would use for a company driver, you can see that almost all of the check marks are in the company expense column. I am indicating that if there is a discount, I will keep it. If there is a fee, this is the card usage fee, that I will pay the card usage fee. If there are, and these others would represent additional costs that are in the fuel card import. So the import file is fixed based on a fixed layout, meaning your fuel card vendor puts specific extra charges in specific designated spots within the file. And so those end up, and we can map up to 8 of those additional designations. So it would be through a template such as this for something like Fleet One or one of the other fuel card providers. If they put an additional cost, we can direct it to an other amount field, which we can then also map using this. So if I know that they put in a certain position a scale fee, I could tell it that it will appear in the other amount one position, and I could map that directly to my scale account, knowing that every time they pass that, it will be in that exact position. I can default that in as a scale expense. All right. So even though if your fuel card does not follow the product code format, we do have other ways to label that expense. But again, all of these items are company expenses. And the one exception, as I run down, rebate, reefer fuel, sales tax, tractor fuel, all being absorbed by my company, meaning at no cost to the driver, except for cash, right? So cash on my card will be taken by the driver, which means I'm charging any cash amount fields back to my driver, okay? So that is an example of my company template. So now I'm going to I've created an owner template. So this is for my owner ops, my 1099 drivers. Well, now the shoe's kind of on the other foot in this example, meaning all of my expenses or all of the items coming in are now a driver expense, meaning I'm passing it back to the driver. So if it's a cash advance, it goes to the driver. He's responsible for that. Any fees, so if it's a fee for taking cash, if it's a fee for taking fuel, those too will be passed. He becomes responsible, the driver, for those fees. All of the other miscellaneous charges 1 through 8 that might appear in the fuel card file. Notice the key values here that I am keeping for myself. Any discounts that are being provided to me by the vendor or by the fuel vendor at the pump, or if there were any rebates involved, I am keeping those. Now, of course, that is something that you decide internally. What is your operating procedure for when do you pass those savings back to your owner operator, or because they're your cards and you're letting them use them, are you keeping those rebates and discounts? So you can see here, I am keeping them. I have chosen to cover any reefer fuel expenses, but any sales tax and any diesel fuel, tractor fuel will be part of the driver's responsibility. Okay? So again, this is my owner template. So once I've created these templates, I am now able to go into my resource fuel card setup. Okay? So this is where I'm going to go to actually begin to associate my drivers to their fuel card. So I have 2 drivers in my system. I have driver man zone, and driver man zone is using a Comdata card following the company template. So the man zone is my company driver. The way that I associate man zone is through the fuel card driver ID. So what we do is we look for a key value in the import file, and we take that key value. So there are 2 key values that we usually operate from. One would be either their fuel card number, which is always in the fuel card file, or optionally, a lot of the fuel card files provide you with what they call the driver ID number or fuel card driver ID number, which is a user-definable field. And oftentimes, I find you as users use something like the last 4 of their social, the truck number that they drive, but it's usually a much shorter number than their fuel card number, which is anywhere between 10 to 15 characters. So this becomes, in my example, the key value. Now, if you do not use that driver ID reference field, it's not a problem. We can change our definition file, the way that we read that, to key off of your fuel card number instead of that driver ID column. So for us, it's just 6 in one, half dozen another. Again, I like to use the driver ID because from a setup perspective, it's usually a little bit easier for you, the end user. So I'm using 80. 80 happens to be her ID in this fuel card file. And then I have a driver, Steve K. Steve K is using has the unique driver reference code 65, also using a Comdata card following the owner-operator template that I've created. So basically, Kim is responsible for nothing but cash, and Steve is responsible for everything but does not get rebates or discounts. If I wanted to associate either one of these drivers with a second card that they happen to carry, first, that vendor must be in the vendor list, so we're using TCH as our example. And then I can go back and I can add that driver once again, this time using, instead of Comdata, I'm using TCH as my vendor, telling it which template to follow, and then what is the key value, that unique value that's in that fuel card file. So maybe with my TCH card, it's 1021. It can be a different ID. But when I import TCH, it knows anytime it sees 1021 that those transactions belong to Steve K. If it's a Comdata file, if it sees unique ID 65, it knows to attach those transactions from Comdata also to Steve K. So this is how we are able to manage two different fuel card files. Okay, the ability to keep track of two cards for the same driver. Okay, and if I had also carried a Fleet 1 card, I could add another vendor and set up another designation for that same driver managing 3 cards in this screen. And that is, again, is one of the more powerful tools of this interface. So I'm going to go back to my templates because I now want to highlight on the third critical item that we discussed in our slides earlier, which is the ability to create what we would call a company fee. That means you get to charge the driver for using your fuel card. So the way that we do that is I'm going to utilize one of these other amount fields. So I'm going to choose other amount 5, just 5 is my lucky number. So what I'm going to do is under advanced amount type, I'm going to change it from other to company fee. So company fee is something that we've created special. It's a unique expense code that allows us to create a triggered calculation. So what I'm going to do is under calculate, basically we give you several options. The calculation can be percent of a field. So percent of a field would be an example. If it detects that there was a cash amount, I want to charge my driver 1% of that cash amount. And if I want it, let's say I want to force it to do a minimum and a maximum of $10, this would be how I would set up a standard $10 fee for whenever they take cash. So the percent here really doesn't matter. It just says when it detects cash being taken, I want to use 1%, but I'm going to force a min of 10, max of 10. Now, I don't have to set mins and maxes. This is just to set me up with a forced $10. There are other ways to do this, or other ways to calculate this company fee. You might do a percent of the total. That means of their total advance per transaction. So if they take a transaction that includes both fuel and cash, and you want a percent of the entire thing, maybe you're getting 1.5% of that. Then I would put in 1.5 of the total amount of the fuel purchase transaction, and then if you want to set min-maxes, you can, but they are not required. So these are all of the different ways. I could just do a flat amount, okay? So anytime the card is swiped, we get $5. Okay, that's a $5 fee anytime there's a transaction. That's a flat amount. Okay, so there are different percent of the cash, percent of the total without rebates. So these are all different ways in which we can calculate whether or not we're going to get a percent for how we calculate our company fee. And of course, that can be revenue. It could be revenue. We could map that company fee account to an income account. We could map it to a suspense account. Maybe we're going to use that. We put it in a suspense account because later on we're going to reallocate it to cover our card fees later on, or maybe that's how you throw your Christmas party. I don't know. It's up to you. I'm going to do percent of a field. I'm going to do 1% of cash, and I'm going to set it up for $10 minimum and $10 maximum. I'm going to save this, and I'm also going to do that in my company profile as well using the other amount. I'm going to 5 field. We're going to do company fee. Again, percent of a field at 1%. Cash amount, and I'm going to force a $10 min-max. But it will only be on transactions that have cash. If it were a fuel purchase, I'm not charging them the fee. So basically, it's a slight penalty for them taking cash out on my cards. Okay. All right, very good. So that completes the setup portion of the fuel card. So let's review very quickly. We talked about adding different expense codes. We talked about setting up fuel card vendors, and if we wanted to, if we used Comdata, TCH, or EFS, we have the ability to map specific product codes to specific expense types to give us granular account mapping into our chart of accounts in our accounting interface, such as QuickBooks, where I remapped trailer expense to go to miscellaneous instead of other. We then went in and we discussed the templates. We set up a company template and an owner-operator template, making our company driver responsible for cash and this company fee. Meanwhile, the company absorbing all of the other costs that are part of the transaction detail. I also created one for owner-operators, where the owner-operator was responsible for everything, only the company gets to keep the discounts and the rebates. We then went into the resource fuel card setup, and we began to add each resource ID to a specific fuel card vendor following a specific template, and then connecting them to the import file using a unique ID within the import file that is designated through your fuel card vendor, either using the fuel card number, but in this case, I used the driver ID field. So that basically is my setup. Once it's set up, you essentially don't ever have to touch that again unless your drivers happen to get a new card or change fuel card vendors, or maybe they go from being company drivers to owner-operators, so you need to switch the type of template that they're going to follow. So otherwise, it's just maintaining this. You get new drivers, right? So you have to add a driver. Otherwise, this is kind of one of those things that you kind of set it and forget it, okay? So I'm going to close out of this screen. And now I'm going to show you the actual import process. So to import that fuel card, those fuel card transactions, your first step would be to get an actual transaction file from your fuel card vendor. Now, every fuel card vendor is a little bit different, and I will give you some examples, ones that I work with regularly. For example, Fleet One uses what is called a file format 35. You physically would have to contact Fleet One, make them aware that you would like to receive file format 35, which is your fuel transaction, in a defined layout, a very specific fuel layout, that they would then either email to you daily, or they will email you an entire week's worth of transactions in one email. That is something that you would discuss with them on how you would like them to deliver the fuel transaction detail. So basically your purchases, do you want to get it in a daily file that you would import each day, or do you want to get one weekly file where you would import at the end of the week the entire week's transactions? Comdata, for example, they use something that's called Comdata Reports. It's an actual executable that you have to contact them to install on your computer, which uses a FTP, which is a file transfer protocol, to actually contact their website and download the fuel transactions. Once they set you up with that file, that executable, that little mini program, you get to control whether you want to download 1 day, 2 days, or a week's worth. You control the date range of transactions that you're downloading. With TCH and EFS, they have right through their normal customer portal, under their reports and download section, you can go under the transaction detail reports, transaction downloads, and one of the formats for downloading the transactions right through your customer portal is called the Comdata style report. It says, right on it, Comdata style in parentheses next to the word transaction detail. Okay, so they're all different. So depending on which cards you use would determine how you receive this file. Now, I've already downloaded mine. I'm just going to open up very quickly my File Explorer and show you that in my Fuel Downloads directory, these are my download files. I just called them Webinar 1, 2, 3, and one just called Webinar. I'm going to show you the contents very quickly. So this is what the contents look like. So you're not expected to be able to decipher this. And the reason why is because we decipher it using a definition file. But obviously, if you look, you can see that these definitely look like, city states and gas station names. And over here look like card numbers. So, but it's all kind of jumbled. But we define this. We create the definition that helps you read that internal data, okay? So to actually import the file, this would be your daily process. After receiving that transaction report, you would go to Utility, Fuel Card Import, and we would be importing fuel card data. And this is the actual import wizard. So the definition file. The definition file is labeled PID. That stands for Prophecy Import Definition. This is the file that we would provide you when you decide that you would like to set up an import for your fuel card for whichever vendor you tell us you're doing it with. This is typically remembered, okay, meaning that the location of that definition is stored after each import. There are times, though, where it will get cleared. So knowing how to reload that definition is very important. So I'm going to click Load Definition. I keep it in a separate folder, and here it is. That's my PID, my import definition, and that is now loaded. The next time I launch this, as you saw when I first opened it, that file path will remain saved, but it is always important to remember how to retrieve it in case it does get cleared. Next is loading my import file. That is the file that I received via email or FTP or download through my fuel vendors portal. That is saved. You download and save that in a designated directory. As I mentioned to you, I stored mine in Fuel Downloads. I click on it and I hit Open. So you can see here's the transactions. This is a preview of what I'm about to import. I'm then going to click Next. This is the verification process. The top are all of the accepted records. The bottom would be all of the rejected records. Now it does happen where you will get rejected records. It is no coincidence that I do not have any, of course. I've done this once or twice before talking to you today, so I made it so I didn't get any. But look here down at the bottom. 9 records were processed. 8 were accepted. 0 rejected. 1 was filtered and removed. If I go back here, the one that is filtered and removed is this one right here that is designated as a number 9. That is not a transaction detail. That is actually a totaling line. This in a normal formatted report that if you looked at with in a PDF, like if you actually ran it as a report, this would be the sum of all of the transactions above it. Well, I don't want that line, so we filter and remove that through our definition. We have a filter to remove that 9 value, okay? So that's why I get all accepted with 1 filtered and removed. I'm going to click my View Headings so that you can actually see. So without it, it's just that jumbled data. But if I click View Headings, it allows me to preview. So look, tractor gallons, tractor amounts. So that's my fuel purchases. I'm seeing fuel card vendor name, city, and state. I'm seeing the dates, reference numbers. All of that information is coming in. Here's my company fee in the proper location. That means that there must have been cash involved. Here are my fees. So these are all columned. I haven't imported them yet. I'm just previewing it, but it's all formatted for me to preview to take a look at before I proceed. So I'm now going to click Next. So once again, 8 records accepted, 0 rejected. Now this is very common spot where you want to make sure that you hit the import button. If you fail to hit this import button, then you will not import your transactions. It is possible to click Done, which will close the interface, but you will not have imported the actual transactions into the dispatch system. So this is a very critical step. You want to make sure you hit Import. It tells me that I'm complete and asks if I would like to import another. I'm going to decline. No, I do not. It will then delete that original file called webinar from my original storage directory, and it's going to back it up in a permanent location under my Prophecy install path. So whether you guys are running off of a network drive that's labeled P, mine is called Z. Oftentimes map drives for Prophecy for P, L, N. It doesn't matter. Wherever your program is running, it stores it in the data directory under DISP called Fuel Card in a backup directory, and it just named it Webinar with today's date and time on it, .back. So why is that useful? Because if you look in that directory, it will give you an indication of what files you may have already imported if you happen to lose track of where you were with your imports. This here is a processed record report. This will be the only time that you see this processed record report. It is a report on the records I just processed. So at this point in time, I would either want to print it or I want to make a PDF and save this report. It is only showing me the transactions that I imported as part of that one transaction file, okay? These transactions, I will never see that report again, okay? But I can still report on these transactions, but just not in this format. So once again, if you want to keep a history of what you've actually imported with each day as you import those files, then you want to save this transaction detail report, this processed record report. But again, I can still see this information even though I don't have this, just not viewed by the actual import files. So I'm going to close this here, and again, I will never see that report again. So how do I see those transactions? That's the next question I'm going to be asking myself. So there are a number of different ways for you to kind of negotiate that question. I'm going to go under reports and bring up all reports, and under D for drivers, you have what's called a driver advance detail and a driver advance summary. So again, under these, find my drivers as I sing my alphabet in my head. Driver advance detail, under advance date. I would run it for the date that I want to see. So if I just want to see 1 day of advances, I happen to know that those all came in on the 5th. If I run this driver advance detail for 1/5, I will see all the advances on just that day. Obviously, if I ran an advance date range, it would show me all of the advances in that date range. So here they are. These are all advances imported on 1/5. So tractor fuel gallons, 94.71. Tractor fuel amount, $195. No cash, so there's no fee, okay? Or no company fee, I should say. And this one here has a cash amount, so here's the company fee for $10, okay? So this allows me to see the information. Same with my driver advances. This is a summary report. I'm going to run this one. And so this is a little bit different. It gives me just one line item per driver. So here were all of Manzone's transactions on 1/5. Here were all of Steve K's transactions on 1/5. So the reports would be one way to view that information. Another way would be through our global or program search feature. So under the search tool, under records to search, you can actually change this to advances. And I can set a date or date range. And if I hit search, any advances that come up in that date or in that date range will then appear. So this is, I would say that this is relatively new. It's not brand new. It's been around for maybe a year or so, but it might be new to some of you as users. You might not know about this advanced search. It's quite a helpful tool. So if I click on any one of these, it actually zooms me into the area that I'm going to show you next, which is the transaction detail record. So this brings me into the detail. I can see every piece. So these were all of those fields from the template. When we were discussing the template, this is what we were mapping. We were mapping all of the data, raw data from that file into these fields here, okay? So what is the transaction detail record that I'm talking about? Well, that is what you would find under this green money bag labeled advance. So the advance green money bag there is how you would issue an advance manually or view advances that are already existing in a detail record. So I'm going to start off with Manzone, and they came in as what is referred to as an NTA. So these are all considered non-trip related advances. They have numbers next to them to keep track. So that's the same place that when I double-clicked in that global search, it brought me to this exact same window, only this allows me to scroll multiple, where the other one was only allowing me to view a single transaction. So what's interesting to point out here would be the gray versus the white fields. So the gray fields represent fields that were flagged as being company responsible amounts, meaning that are going to be charged to the company or held responsible by the company. So you can see that my tractor, my diesel fuel total, is a company responsible amount. My reefer total, if I had one, would have been a company responsible amount. You can see that there in this example there is a rebate. So when you come over here and you look at the company total, all of the values are in the company total field. The driver is not responsible for anything in this advance. So even though the advance comes in, this advance would count nothing. It would be a null value in terms of counting against my driver during a driver settlement because there's no cash. So in the company total, notice that the difference is $189.35, which is different than this here. Obviously, it's minus the rebate amount. Okay, so 195.03 minus the 568 means that they're really 189.35 is the total that they're responsible for. Okay, I'm going to scroll down to one that did have cash. So here is my company, my payroll driver, company driver, using the again the fees here because there was cash on the card. The card company. This is the fee passed from the card company. So this is a transaction fee for taking cash on the card as provided by my fuel card vendor. So $250, that's being absorbed by the company. There is no fuel, so everything else is the responsibility of the driver, which is the cash amount of $150 plus the $10 company fee that I charge the driver for taking cash on my fuel card. That's my service fee. So the driver is responsible or will be required to provide me $160 at time of settlement. Okay, so this is what the company driver one looks like. I'm now going to go under that same green money bag, and we're going to look up Steve K, and we're going to go under Add Edit, and this one's going to will appear a lot differently, right? There is no company total in this one. My driver is responsible for all of the amounts here. So we're going to go down. I'm going to see if there's one. Excellent. So there is one with fuel. So only no rebates or discounts. So there's nothing, again, for the company. My driver total being everything that they took on the fuel plus the transaction fee for using the card. Okay. So these are just the transaction detail records that based on what we've imported. So the next question is that I'm asking myself, well, how does that relate to my daily process? What is this gaining me? What sort of ease of use advantage does this provide? And I would say that the main key factor here would be when you are doing your settlements. So what I did is I just created a quick little batch where one trip for my owner-operator and I have 2 trips for my company driver. I set a payroll date filter of 01 through 021. So that's going to be my payroll period, a little bit extended, but I'm sure you'll all forgive me here. Underneath, if I highlight a driver, if I come down here and click on Show NTAs, there are those are the transactions that we've imported. When I select my transaction, I'm using a feature in my preferences that to auto-select my NTAs based on my filter date. So because these transactions were within my payroll filter date, they are automatically selected when I try to pay Steve K for his load. So he's making $28.50 on this load from California to Nevada, Iowa, and then these are his advance totals, $549.11. We're going to show the actual settlement detail report in just a minute. Then I'm going to go into Kim, and I'm going to select both of Manzone's earnings, and when I select her earning loads, each one is for $500. All of her NTAs within my payroll period will automatically select as well. Okay. Obviously, you can enter in reimbursements like you would normally have when you deal with this payroll this settlement module. But now I'm going to print this up so you can see this in the actual settlement detail report. So here's my payroll period. There are some specific report options. One of them is the displayed fuel import transaction detail, which I currently have disabled, but that's something that if you get this module, you're more than welcome to try out. The reason why I leave it disabled is because I find it to be a bit overwhelming in detail. And when you have 4 transactions, it does tend to extend the length of your settlement reports. So me disabling it is actually a common selection from most users. They choose not to show that transaction detail. And once again, it's because it extends the driver settlement report, and they like to keep it nice, clean, and crisp for their drivers. but it is available for you if you do choose to check that report option. So here's the settlement report. So I turned it into PDF to kind of scroll a little bit easier for me, and I'm going to zoom in at 125% for you. And the first two are the load earnings for Manzone. So that's not kind of my highlight. I want to scroll to my second page. So I have my earnings summary. So Kim's getting paid a total of $1,000. But here are my related advances. So you can see we have 3 advances that are part of Kim's settlement. They are the 3 advances that had chargeable fees to my driver, such as the cash. So here's the cash, and the cash. You can see the total advance amount is $110 because of the $10 service fee that I'm charging, that company fee for taking that cash. So that's a total of $380 in advances. So down here in my settlement summary, it's a total earnings of $1,000 minus $380 in advances, which would bring my gross settlement amount for my payroll driver down to $620. I'm going to scroll down to my next driver and show you the detailed portion of his settlement report. So 4 transactions combining tractor fuel, so a fuel purchase, a $125 fee. This combines $1,250 as a combination of the $10 fee plus the $250 fee for taking the cash amount itself, and then of course the total would be the sum of those 3 fields. So totaling $549.11. So an earnings of $2,850 minus $210.36 individually of fuel by itself minus $338.75 of other and cash advances. Once again, the minusing $549.11, giving me a settlement amount of $2,300.89. So this is, as I mentioned, the payoff, right? This is where importing this information is facilitating your office process, that back office process. Now we're streamlining your settlements because these are 8 transactions that I don't have to key in by hand for these 2 drivers. So you could imagine for 15 drivers over the course of a week, the number of transactions entries that this can save you during settlements. So that concludes the practical display of today's webinar. So what I would like to do is I would just like to take a moment to recap for you. So we're going to bring back up our PowerPoint. So the things that we covered today was we went into the fuel card, advanced fuel card setup, and we discussed setting up different fuel card vendors that you might participate with. Within those fuel card vendor files, you might use product codes where we were able to set up granular expense account mappings for the different types of product codes that import in that fuel card file. We also set up unique driver templates where within those driver templates we were able to associate fees for taking cash and or fuel. And then we also went through the process of importing actual fuel card transactions into our dispatch system, tying together all of that setup information, importing those fuel transactions, and then seeing the fees that the fuel card company charges us and how we expense those, the company fee, the service fee we charge our drivers, as well as the cash and fuel, and how that applies in practical application in our payroll module. Okay, so that is what we covered today in this presentation.
Steve, thank you very much. That was an excellent overview of the Fuel Card Manager, both the setup and the implementation and how people use it practically every day. And I'm sure that those on the phone today that do not yet have the module certainly got a lot out of that, as well as those people that are currently using it. And just from the volume of questions that came in as you were talking, I know that people are very interested in. And let's go ahead and go over to the Q&A. The first question, Steve, that came in was from Paul, and Paul asked, why did all of the imports say they were NTAs? can a load number come in with the fuel card data?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And the reason why the NTAs came in as, quote, NTAs and not with a actual trip number is because my fuel file did not possess an actual trip number. Now, what you can do is you have the ability at the pump to be able to require your driver to enter a trip number when they are making a fuel card transaction. If the trip number they enter in when making that transaction matches a trip number inside of the application, the Prophesy dispatch application, then it does have the ability, yes, to match that fuel transaction to a specific trip number, and it would no longer be considered an NTA, which is a loose transaction, but instead it would then be a trip-related transaction using the trip number reference that matched in the system, and then it would settle whenever that trip is selected. So would be the fuel transaction or cash advance with the corresponding load number on it. So yes, they can come in if they are entered at the pump and it matches, and which is obviously the key, right? They put in a trip number that isn't in the system, it's not going to know which one to put it to, so it would default back to NTA. But if it does match a trip number, it can associate.
Super. And Brenda had a similar question, Steve, along that lines. If an advance does come in as an NTA, can they go ahead and associate it with a specific load if they want to?
Yes. In fact, under the operations menu of the dispatch program, there's an option that's called Modify Advance Assignments. And in that submenu would be a screen that allows you to look at each driver, view their NTAs, and it would show all available trip numbers that driver has in the system. And through a simple drag and drop process, you can drop an NTA onto a load number, and it would reassign that NTA directly to that trip number.
Thanks for that answer. Another question that was actually asked by a couple of people, when you did the setup, you associated the fuel card with a driver. Can the fuel card be associated with a tractor and not a driver?
And the answer to that question is yes, it can. You can certainly associate a fuel card with a tractor instead of a driver. There are some additional parameters or circumstances that when importing, if you do have it associated to a tractor, the system must detect that tractor is on a load that is during the day that the fuel transaction is importing. So in other words, if the fuel card file says that you have purchased fuel on January 5th, obviously that truck number must be on a load in the system during January 5th. Okay, so if you do decide to associate with tractors, which is 100% able to be done, that would be a caveat to it being able to import it successfully.
Great, thank you very much for that answer. The next question has to do with, Tom asked it, we currently use the fuel card import. Is that the same as the fuel card manager? I'll go ahead and take that one, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Tom, the fuel card the fuel card import was actually an import that we developed several years ago. So that predated, if you will, the fuel card manager that was released about 3 or 4 years ago. In the fuel card, the major differences between the two, with the fuel card import, it doesn't automatically handle all the fees, doesn't have all the setup that Steve showed you. You can only associate one card with a driver. You can't set up multiple cards per driver. So it's much more basic, and you're having to do a lot more manual with that fuel card import. If there are other people on the line today that are currently using the fuel card import, you can certainly upgrade to the fuel card manager. You can contact me about that, or you can contact your account rep directly. The next question, Steve, was similar. Adam was asking, can we associate more than one fuel card with a driver?
Yes, absolutely, and we touched briefly on that in the setup. You can associate in the fuel card association section of the fuel card manager. You can have multiple fuel cards for the same driver, and it's not a problem at all. Absolutely, yes. And
a couple more questions here. Importing fuel purchases into tax tally? Will the fuel purchases flow into tax tally?
That's a great question and something that I didn't touch base on, but that is another one of the benefits, yes. Any one of these fuel transactions that is imported through the utility is then able to be shared with our tax tally program. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term tax tally is the program that we use for doing our IFTA fuel taxes. So any importable fuel gallons that come in through your fuel card interface can then be pushed into our tax tally program to help you make your IFTA fuel tax calculations. Yes.
And another question on reporting, and if you want, I can certainly answer this one. It's the question came in is, how does the fuel card import reflect on profitability reports? And there is at least one report in the system that I'm personally familiar with that you can run over a period of time, a summary, let's say for a tractor for a certain period of time, that will show you not only the revenue that was brought in by that tractor, but we'll break out expenses, including driver pay, including fuel that was purchased, including maintenance expenses, including any reoccurring expenses that you've set up in the program, and we'll give you a P&L for the specific time frame and even break it down into a P&L per mile for you as well. And let me just take one more look, Steve. There were some people continuing to ask some questions. Let's see. The other question is, will a recording of this webinar be available? Indeed it will, and we will be sending that out to everybody that was on the call today and everybody actually that registered for the presentation.
Is it safe to assume that we'll also post that on our YouTube channel as well?
We will as well. That is correct. That'll wrap up the Q&A today. I'd like to just remind everybody once again of the upcoming user conference. You will learn a lot more about your Prophesy software, have great network opportunities. There will certainly be a session on the Fuel Card Manager as well at the Elevate conference. Once again, the early bird registration has been extended for Prophesy customers. It does run through January 31st. Use the code Prophesy16 when registering, and the website is HighJump.com/Elevate2016. Thank you all for attending today's presentation. If you'd like more information on the Fuel Card Manager, or if you'd like to upgrade from the Fuel Card Import or add the Fuel Card Manager, please contact me or your account manager. Thank you again, and have a great day.